friends, so welcome back to our series on gaslighting. This is part 2 of 3. If you missed part 1, it's up on our YouTube channel, so please go check it out. So, I think we have established so far that gaslighting is a deliberate behavior used by manipulative people to try to shake your self-confidence and question your sanity. When you talk about it in a third-person point of view, a lot of times it can seem like, does that really work on people? We touched on the reasons why in that first video, because it's a pattern. It's played out over time. It isn't like an argument or something that happens only when emotions are high. It can happen when you aren't aware. A long con, if you will. If you think about it this way, long cons are effective because the perpetrators earn your trust first. Your spidey sense is not likely to go off for little things that don't feel quite right because you know this person, right? Gaslighting follows a similar playbook. Here are some of the things that you might find yourself experiencing when you have been a victim of gaslighting. Number 1, you feel more anxious and less confident than you used to be. Nothing can quite break down a confident, self-assured person like being the victim of gaslighting. It's not really hard to understand why, because it wears you down to a point where you can sometimes begin questioning things about yourself that you may have never done before, like your ability to remember things correctly, or your recall, or hell, your sanity, because it can literally make you feel like you're losing your mind. Needless to say, this is a very vulnerable, and not in a good way, state to be in. The stress associated with it can come with a healthy amount of anxiety, too, even if that's not something you may have suffered from before. And it can be long-lasting, sometimes even long after the gaslighter's not in your life anymore. It carries into other relationships and situations too, and sometimes it can take a very long time to build your confidence back to where it's once again at a healthy level. Number 2, you feel like everything you do is wrong. Have you ever felt like despite trying your best, you just can't seem to do anything right, especially when it comes to things that are going on in a certain interpersonal relationship? Gaslighting can definitely bring you to this place where you find yourself doubting everything, including your abilities and who you are. And that's not really surprising, since the reason you feel that way is because you're being fed those doubts. So when you find yourself in that space where it feels like everything is just wrong, it's probably not that you have actually been an incompetent boob this whole time and you're very late to the party and finding out. It's probably more that you have been worn down mentally into thinking that you are. Number 3, you apologize often for everything, even things you didn't do. This is a big one. It really should have been the first thing on the list. We have talked many times about how when you're wrong, apologizing is okay. It's a good thing, and it's necessary when there's a conflict in an interpersonal relationship. It's a sign of maturity and personal accountability. But when you find yourself apologizing for everything, even something that you didn't do, that's a problem. And listen, yes, there are going to be times in life where you choose the relationship with the person you're fighting with over being right. You lose the battle to win the war, so to speak. But friends, apologizing when you did nothing wrong, simply because you want to avoid conflict, or because of carried guilt versus actual guilt, you can do serious damage to your sense of self-worth. And it gives the gaslighter something to hold over you because they know that you will likely absorb some of the blame in this situation no matter what. Number 4, you second-guess your ability to remember things often. This is a tough one, friends, because when you are experiencing it, it makes you literally question your brain's ability to process and retain information. I would know, because a little personal tidbit here. Those who know me know that my long-term memory is near photographic. When a friend is trying to remember the name of our 3rd grade teacher's dog, they call me, and chances are I know the answer. In my very young adulthood, I was in a relationship with someone who was a gaslighter, even though I didn't know that's what it was at the time. They would constantly tell me that something didn't happen, even if I saw evidence of it right in front of my very eyes. They would constantly tell me that they didn't say something that I know they said because, well, I have ears and I heard it, and I retained it. This went on for a couple of years, but being that I was like 18 or 19 years old, I really didn't know how to deal with it. Needless to say, it started to make me question everything, including that memory that I had never questioned before. I felt like I was, for lack of a better term, going crazy. It wasn't until years later, when they were long gone and out of my life, that I realized I wasn't crazy at all. And the problem wasn't that I didn't understand their words or that my memory sucked. It was that they were just an abusive a-hole, to sum it up. Number 5, you find yourself constantly making excuses for the gaslighter. Friends, in case you haven't heard, making excuses for other grown-ass adults has been canceled for a while now. Look, when you do this, honestly, neither party benefits. You certainly don't. And they don't get called out on their actions, so they will continue to do them. And listen, I know, when you care about someone, you don't want other people to think badly about them, so you try to paint them in a better light. But you really can't do that. It's terrible for your mental health. You are literally lying to yourself and others. Let people's actions and behavior speak for itself. You're entitled to tell your true story, even if it makes someone else look bad. Like I often say, if you want me to write your part in my story in a positive light, then all you have to do is act better. Don't be an a-hole and do me dirty. Number 6, you feel isolated. One of the biggest tells that you're in an emotionally abusive relationship with someone is that they work hard to try to isolate you from your friends and or your family. This might be anything from trying to monopolize absolutely all of your time to convincing you that you need to move away from them, etc. I mean, it's much easier to try to control someone if they don't have someone else who actually cares about them around to protect them, or at a minimum, question the things that the gaslighter is doing, right? This is a tough one, especially in romantic relationships, because it creates a really weird dynamic between you, the gaslighter, and your support system. But look, in a healthy relationship, you don't have to feel like you need to choose. There's not that weirdness. You can have the healthy relationship and your friends and your family, and they can coexist at the same time even. You just have to make sure that when you see a red flag flying where it seems like the gaslighter is trying to pen you off somewhere, either physically or emotionally, that you disconnect from people you love because they feel some kind of way about it, pay attention. You can't let them do that. Not sure how else I can put that. Number 7, you are constantly being told how to feel. This is a big ticket item too in a relationship where you're being gaslit. This behavior sometimes sounds like, you shouldn't feel that, or your feelings are wrong, it's not this, it's that. Listen, nobody has the right to tell you how to feel, period. Your feelings are your feelings. You have every right to have them, and they are valid. Doesn't mean that the gaslighter won't still try to often make you question them, or even your take on reality so they can undermine your judgment, though. But remember, only you get to decide how you feel about a situation, period. Full stop. Number 8, you no longer feel like the person that you used to be. Everyone gets to a point where, well, life happens, and they feel like they have changed. They just aren't the same anymore. That's just life. What happens in it does change us sometimes, but the good things about the bad times in your life is that they don't last forever. You know that eventually you'll get a bounce back. But when you're being broken down psychologically, it makes it very hard to see that. You feel like that person you were is gone forever, and that's an absolutely awful way to feel. Everyone's journey to reconnect with themselves is going to be different, of course, but it can happen by focusing on getting grounded, self-reflecting, learning from mistakes, and figuring out what you want and what you never want to experience again. The old you might feel gone, but that's not always a bad thing, right? It makes the ground fertile for positive change, for being a better you that's wiser. And you can get there with some realignment by prioritizing you and your needs and making whatever changes you need to make for this to happen, regardless of how painful or difficult that might be. Number 9, you constantly sense that something is wrong or off in your relationship with the gaslighter, but you can't identify what it is. One big thing that gaslighters do is practice a tactic called DARVO, deny, accuse, reverse victim, offender. We have talked about all of these in some way in this video, and in the previous video too, so I will just say this about it. When you experience it, you usually know on some level that something isn't right. Something is not gelling. The longer the gaslighting goes on, the more difficult it can become to identify, and that is intentional. The best way to deal with this is to listen to what all of your body and mind is trying to tell you. And if you have the absolute gift of having people around you who care, I mean truly care about you, enough to tell you the truth about a situation, do yourself a favor. Listen to what they have to say. And yes, I know, it's easier to see stuff like this from the outside than when it's you. But when someone loves you enough to tell you the things you need to hear versus only the things you want to, that's a real friend. I would know, because if I'm honest, some of the biggest regrets I've had in life have no doubt been ignoring all of the things that people tried to warn me about with other people and just going for it anyway. Only to learn later that, well, they were right all along. Sometimes there are so many signs in our relationships that something is wrong, but in interest of keeping the peace or maintaining a temporary happiness high, we ignore it. Those red flags aren't a sign that there's a carnival ahead, my friends. They're signs that you need to be aware and present in what's going on so you don't get wrapped up in a web of BS that the gaslighter has spun for you. And number 10, you question how you respond to anything they say or do, such as wondering if it's you that's the unreasonable one. I didn't purposely save this one for last, but it's a good way to tie things up because it's probably the biggest issue with gaslighting and the biggest takeaway from this video series. It's about the self-doubt that this type of abuse tactic creates. When you find yourself wondering things like, could they be right? Am I really the problem? Or am I just being too difficult? Just stop and think about this for a minute. Wanting someone to treat you with kindness and give you grace and not blame you for everything and not always make everything about you being the bad guy or the unreasonable one is not you being the problem or you being too difficult. It's pretty much basic human decency 101. And so is having very simple, basic human needs that should be a given in an interpersonal relationship, like being respected and having your feelings matter. These, my friends, are standards, and you do not need to lower your standards for anyone. And you certainly should never lower them due to someone else's inability to meet them. It's like putting yourself on the Walmart clearance rack when you know you belong in the front window of the Gucci store and people are going to need an appointment to see you up close. Never shortchange or cheapen yourself for anyone. So there you have it. 10 things that can happen to you when you have been the victim of gaslighting. I hope that you found this information helpful and can use it to protect yourself. Speaking of which, part 3 of this series will be available to watch next Monday. And in that one, we will talk about several ways that you can outsmart a gaslighter and protect your mental health. I hope you'll join us, as I have a free little bonus for you too as a companion for the video series. Details on that soon. See you again next week.